The jungle of Jiraiya did not whisper, it watched. The trees were taller than towers, their bark covered in veins of light that pulse softly in time with something ancient beneath the soil. Strange flowers bloomed and folded with each breath of wind, exhaling scents too delicate for sensors to name. The ground itself glowed in faint red hues, as if it remembered every footstep laid upon it. Oren Vance adjusted his scanner and stepped over a thick root, his boots leaving soft prints on the sponge-like soil. He had wandered farther from base camp than he should have. Every protocol said turn back. But the tremor, that short, sudden shudder of Earth 20 minutes ago, it had called to him. The jungle had gone quiet since then. Too quiet. No rustle of scaled birds. No chirps from mist lizards. Even the glowing vines that usually danced in the canopy had gone still, as if nature itself were holding its breath. He pushed through a curtain of moss and found it, a crater, fresh, not from any known drop pod or meteorite. The edges were still hot, steam rising like breath from an open wound in the planet's skin. Oren's heart beat faster. He stepped down into the pit, careful not to trigger a collapse. The scanner buzzed. Biological activity, not plant, not known. At the center, half buried in soft ash, was something that shimmered, smooth, round, slightly translucent. It pulsed softly with an inner light, like a heartbeat. An egg, not a reptile egg, not avian, not anything human science had ever catalogued. The surface glowed like pearl, but darker, shifting between shades of silver and ink. Oren knelt, breath shallow. He reached out. The moment his fingertips brushed the shell, the air around him changed. A hum rippled through the soil, not loud, but deep enough to stir the dust around his boots. His scanner blinked. Biological energy signature detected. Unknown species. Cellular activity high. The egg was alive. Something in Oren's chest tugged. Logic said, leave it. Science said, preserve it in containment. But something older, something human, whispered back, take it. He wrapped the egg gently in a thermal cloth, careful not to disturb the shell's integrity. It felt warm against his chest, not threatening, almost comforting, like it wanted to be carried. Let's get you out of here, he whispered. He didn't know something watched him from above. Far in the treetops, hidden beneath layers of camouflaged leaves, two silver eyes narrowed. She had seen the crater, had felt the tremor from the sacred cliffs, and now she watched the outsider, this human, carry away what no one from her tribe had dared touch for generations. The egg of the Forsaken. Zira did not speak aloud, but her voice whispered inside her bones. He has taken the curse. The old stories begin again. The shelter hummed softly in the middle of the clearing, its metal walls half covered in moss and the glow of bioluminescent fungi. Inside, it was quiet, but not lifeless. Oren had cleared his workbench, adjusted the thermal lamp, and placed the egg in a carefully built nest of synthetic cloth, fiber padding, and heat-reactive mesh. Every part of him told him this was insane, unauthorized, reckless, but he couldn't stop watching it. The egg glowed faintly, pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythm, like the heartbeat of a sleeping star. He sat beside it with a mug of nutrient tea, not touching, just observing. AI log, he said aloud. Subject is stable. Internal energy levels rising. Cracks forming near apex. His assistant, a soft-voiced AI unit named LUX, replied from the overhead console. Estimated hatching window now reduced to 36 hours. Species remains unidentified. Cellular patterns suggest high adaptability. Any threat indicators? Oren asked. None yet, said LUX, but early-stage readings show rapid neurodevelopment. Whatever it is, it's going to learn fast. Oren leaned back, exhaled slowly, and stared at the egg's light. You're not a threat, he murmured. You're just waiting. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He lay on the cot, eyes open, watching shadows move across the walls. Rain tapped lightly against the roof. Somewhere in the jungle, a single howl echoed, a long, lonely sound that felt more like warning than music. When the crack came, it was almost too soft to notice. A gentle snap, then another. Oren was on his feet in seconds. The egg was moving. Tiny fissures spread across its shell like lightning bolts in glass. The glow intensified, changing color, silver to violet to a deep molten red. Then with a soft pop, the top of the egg split. Out of it came silence. Then two glowing eyes opened, red, massive, in proportion to the creature's small body. It blinked slowly, almost confused, then tilted its head and stared straight at Oren. He froze. The creature emerged slowly, delicately. Its body was sleek, coated in scales blacker than night. It looked wet, but the surface shimmered with a strange living sheen. 4 legs, long tail, no visible mouth at first, just those eyes, watching, reading. Then it chirped, a tiny sound, software curious. Oren's breath caught in his throat. "Hello there," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." The creature blinked again, and then, astonishingly, it walked toward him. Unsteady steps, legs wobbling. It stumbled once, then pressed its head gently against the palm of his outstretched hand. The warmth shocked him, not heat. Connection. Lux chimed in, voice slightly hushed, heartbeat steady, no aggression. Neural patterns suggest imprinting has begun. Oren knelt slowly. "I'm calling you Kael," he said softly. "You okay with that?" Kael chirped again, curled his tail around his feet, and sat calmly beside him, like he had always belonged there. Outside, the jungle listened. Far above, hidden in the trees, Zira's eyes narrowed. She had followed the human to his shelter, watched the birth from a distance, unseen. Her hand gripped the hilt of her ceremonial blade. "That's no hatchling," she whispered. "That's the blood of the old curse," but she didn't move, because what she saw in the creature's eyes was not fury, it was choice, and the human had been chosen. 3 days, that was all it took. In just 3 days, Kael had doubled in size. What once looked like a strange feline reptile now moved like a predator in waiting. His sleek black scales had darkened into armor-like plates along his back. His teeth, once small and nubby, were now curved like ivory blades. He didn't hiss, he didn't growl, but when he moved, the world noticed. Oren watched the transformation with equal parts awe and dread. Kael still chirped when fed, still pressed his head into Oren's palm when comforted. But there were moments, brief flashes, when something else flickered behind those glowing red eyes. A memory not his, a violence older than Oren could name. The scanner confirmed what instinct already whispered. Accelerated mutation, combat-based neural development, evolution by experience. Kael wasn't just growing, he was preparing. One night, the first test came. Oren sat at his console, half asleep, reviewing old logs. The shelter's windows were fogged from the night rains, the jungle outside veiled in mist. Kael rested nearby, curled like a shadow against the far wall. Then came the sound. A low growl, not from Kael, from the jungle. Oren froze. Kael snapped upright, muscles tense, eyes locked on the mist beyond the glass. "Kael," Oren whispered. The creature's tail lashed slowly. No threat to Oren, but a warning. Something else was out there. Seconds later, the glass shattered. A monstrous figure burst through the wall, 8 feet tall, fur matted with mud and blood, yellow fangs flashing in the light, eyes burning like coals. It let out a roar that made the shelter tremble. Oren stumbled back, heart hammering. Then something black slammed into the beast. Kael, no hesitation, no cry, just motion, fluid and brutal. He hit the intruder mid-charge, claws sinking into flesh, jaws snapping toward the creature's throat. The larger beast tried to throw him off, slamming Kael into the ground, into the wall, into steel beams. But Kael didn't break. He learned, he adjusted. Every blow refined him. Every second sharpened his instincts. Oren watched, stunned, as the creature he had fed and named became something else, something unstoppable. Kael twisted, dodged a crushing strike, then leapt. This time he landed perfectly on the beast's back, sunk his fangs deep into its neck, and held. The monster howled once, then went still. Silence fell. The shelter was in ruins. Steam rose from broken panels. Blood pooled around the floor, and in the middle of it all, Kael stood over the body, breathing heavy, red eyes glowing like ancient fire. He turned, saw Oren, walked forward, and sat, gently, pressing his bloodied head into Oren's chest. Oren didn't step back. He dropped to his knees, wrapped his arms around Kael, and whispered through shaking breath, "What are you?" Kael didn't answer, but somewhere deep in the jungle, someone else had watched the battle. Zira, through a crystal orb passed down by her tribe. She had witnessed it all. Not just the kill, but the choice. Kael could have turned on the human, could have left him behind. But he didn't. She stepped back into the shadows and whispered to the wind. "He teaches a predator how to love." The jungle breathed again. For 3 nights, the rain had fallen in silent sheets, washing blood into the soil, erasing the claw marks from Kael's first kill. Oren rebuilt the shattered wall of the shelter, using whatever parts he could salvage. Kael stayed close, sleeping less, watching more. The bond between them had grown into something wordless, something neither of them could name, but both could feel. But Oren wasn't the only one watching. The tribal signs appeared first, etched into bark, scratched into stone, symbols shaped like eyes and spirals, ancient warnings carved in glowing blue paint. Oren recognized them now. He was being tested. That evening, he lit 2 torches and placed them at the jungle's edge, a sign of peace, an invitation. Then he waited. Kael sat at his side, still as stone, his body no longer small, no longer innocent, but his tail swayed gently, and his eyes, though fierce, held no malice. The jungle answered. A shape emerged from the dark, silent and sharp. Princess Zira stepped into the light. Her cloak hung wet with rain. A curved bow strapped to her back. Tribal markings danced across her cheeks like inked fire. Her expression unreadable. "You knew I would come," she said. Oren stood slowly. "Kael told me." She looked at the creature, who stared back without blinking. Then, slowly, Kael sat. No growl, no threat, only respect. Zira stepped forward, circled the fire, and sat on the opposite side. She removed her hood. Her eyes gleamed like polished stone. "You do not understand what he is," she said. Oren nodded. "I don't know what he's supposed to be, but I know who he is." Zira's voice was low. "He's part of a lost bloodline, a predator once used to bring empires to their knees. My ancestors hunted them until only eggs remained. They called them cursed." Oren didn't speak, just watched the flames dance. "But this one," Zira continued, "he doesn't kill without cause. He doesn't rage without control. He follows you. Why?" Oren shrugged gently. "Because I didn't teach him fear. I taught him care." Zira pulled a small crystal from her pouch and placed it between them. Its surface shimmered with tribal sigils. "Tomorrow," she said, "the trial of shadows begins." Oren's brow furrowed. "A fight?" "A judgment," she replied. "Not by elders, not by me, by him." She pointed at Kael. "If he obeys you during the trial, if he remains himself, it means your bond is pure. If not, the tribe will intervene." Oren swallowed. "What happens if he fails?" Zira's silence said enough. Then she stood. "You have 1 night to prepare. When the sun rises, you will not speak with words, only with trust." She disappeared into the trees, as silently as she had arrived. Oren turned to Kael. The creature had not moved, but his ears twitched. He had heard everything. That night, Oren lay beside him, beneath a canopy of stars, his hand resting on Kael's thick shoulder. "You're more than your claws, buddy," he whispered. "You've got a heart, a soul. You chose me, not the other way around." Kael let out a low rumble. almost like a purr, and far above, hidden among the cliffs, Zira stood once more in the shadows. She had come to confirm a curse, but what she saw instead was a creature sleeping beside a human and choosing not to run. At sunrise, the jungle held its breath. No birds sang, no wind stirred. The sacred arena of the Narav tribe, hidden deep within the cliffs, glowed dimly with torches lit from blue firewood, their flames whispering against ancient stone. The arena was not made of metal or modern machines. It was carved from the land itself. Every crack held memory. Every mark was earned. Oren stood barefoot on the arena's warm stone, sweat already dripping down his back despite the morning chill. Kael stood beside him, silent and still, his body lowered but alert, tail twitching slowly like a pendulum of waiting fate. Above, hundreds of Narav tribespeople lined the cliffs, weapons at their backs, paint across their faces. They watched not with celebration, but judgment. Most did not cheer. Some whispered. All waited. At the far end, opposite Oren, stood Princess Zira. She wore the robes of her ancestors, green, black, and gold thread, woven with the bones of extinct guardians. A glowing staff rested in her hand. She did not smile. Her face was made of stone. The tribal elder stepped forward to the edge of the high cliff. His voice cut through the silence. Let the bond be judged. A gate opened. The ground trembled. From the shadows emerged a beast nearly twice the size of Kael, covered in battle scars, one eye blind, chains still dragging from its back legs, a rivrak, the last of its kind, a jungle terror bred in the ancient wars. It roared. The cliff shook. Oren's heart thudded. He looked at Kael, ready to call out. But Kael didn't charge. He didn't growl. He knelt. To everyone's shock, Kael lowered his head, not to Oren, but to Zira. A wave of whispers swept through the cliffs. The predator had bowed. Zira took a stunned step forward. Her eyes widened. He chose me too, she whispered. But the moment broke. The rivrak yanked its chains free and charged. Kael, go! Oren yelled. Kael exploded into motion, black scales flashing. He met the beast mid-run, the collision sending dust and stone flying. Roars rang out, claws scraped, teeth snapped. It was chaos. But Kael was not wild. He was precise. He dodged, rolled, struck only when necessary. He pushed the beast back, never losing himself to rage. When the rivrak slammed him against the wall, Kael rose again, eyes steady, breath controlled. Then came the true test. The rivrak turned, not toward Kael, but toward Zira. It charged her, a trap, a tribal test, whispered in secret by one of the elders. Let us see where his loyalty truly lies. Kael didn't hesitate. He surged forward, faster than lightning, faster than thought, and threw himself between Zira and the charging beast. He took the full brunt of the blow, body slamming into stone, but he held. And then, for the second time, Kael knelt, first to Zira, then to Oren. His head bowed to them both. The arena went silent. Then the elder raised his staff high and spoke. The beast obeys no leash, no chain. He obeys only trust. He turned to Zira. You have been chosen. He turned to Oren. So have you. He raised his arms to the cliffs. Let it be known. A bond has formed beyond blood. A new path begins today. Some warriors cheered. Others remained still. But none raised a weapon. Not now. Later, in the quiet garden temple, behind the arena, Oren sat beneath a tree, his breathing finally steady. Kael lay beside him, tail lazily flicking. Zira approached, her footsteps softer now, no armor on her frame. She sat beside him. I never thought I'd say this, she murmured. What? Oren asked. Thank you. He looked at her. For what? For proving that even the most dangerous heart can choose peace. They both turned to Kael, who didn't roar, didn't growl. He simply rested his head on Oren's knee, exhaling slowly. At peace, the night after the trial was supposed to be quiet. The tribe feasted under lanterns strung between trees. Elders recited old songs, and children laughed as Kael let them climb over his back, purring softly, like a guardian at rest. Oren stood beside Zira, watching the fire's glow reflect off Kael's obsidian scales. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt right. Then the jungle shook. It began with a scream, inhuman, unnatural, stretched thin, like metal tearing. Oren spun toward the trees. Kael was already up, tail rigid, eyes locked on the east. Zira ran to him, staff in hand. Her warriors followed, their bows raised, paint smeared fresh across their faces. A scout burst into the clearing. Blood streaked across his shoulder. They hit the eastern village, he gasped. Everyone, gone. Only this was left. He held out a broken banner, blackened by flame. The mark was unmistakable, a shattered star. Zira went pale. That symbol has not been seen in 100 years. Oren stepped forward. What does it mean? It means war is coming, she whispered. The council convened before midnight. Elders emerged from hidden chambers, armor made of bone and scale, dusted off from temple walls. Swords too ancient for their sheaths were laid upon stone. This wasn't a tribal hunt, this was a reckoning. The broken star, Zira explained to Oren, is a cult. They believe the bond between human and beast is blasphemy. They see Kael not as a guardian, but a mistake, one that must be erased before others follow. Oren clenched his fists. So they kill to preserve fear. Zira nodded. And they've bred their own monsters, abominations grown in hatred, twisted versions of what Kael might have become. Kael growled low beside them, sensing something neither words nor reason could explain. They're coming, Oren said. And they did. At dawn, the jungle groaned under their weight. Black armored figures emerged from the mist, weapons forged from bone and dark alloy. Behind them came beasts, some barely alive, some too alive, creatures shaped like Kael, but missing his eyes, his heart, his choice. In the center of it all stood her, a woman in tattered robes, hair silver, eyes hollow, the leader of the cult. Her staff pulsed with dark energy, shaped like a broken star. She pointed directly at Kael. Burn the impure bond, destroy the future. The battle erupted. Zira led the tribe with a cry that shook the cliffs. Arrows of energy flew. Oren fought at her side, using salvage tech, sonic grenades, energy nets. Kael tore through the battlefield like a storm made flesh. But he didn't kill with rage. He moved to protect, to shield, to preserve. And then Kael met his match. A shadow emerged from the trees. It looked like him. Same black armor, same clawed limbs, same size. But its eyes were blue, cold, dead, empty. No soul, Oren breathed. Just hate. Zira narrowed her gaze. It's his shadow. The two beasts clashed in the center of the chaos. Claws met claws. Teeth snapped. The earth shook under their fury. But the shadow was relentless. Faster, crueler. Every time Kael struck, the shadow struck harder. Not with emotion, but with command. Above them, cultists watched. One whispered, "Break the bond. Break the future." Kael staggered. Blood spilled from his side. "Kael, pull back," Oren shouted. But Kael didn't. He stood, torn, bleeding, breathing hard, not from pride, but from something deeper, choice. The Oren stepped forward, voice loud and clear. "You are not their monster, you are my friend." Kael's eyes blinked and changed, from red to gold, hope. He moved with new grace, not to destroy, but to disarm. He led the shadow into tangled roots, twisted it into its own strength. He used the land, the memories of every battle he had survived, not just one. Then Kael pinned the creature to the ground. He didn't kill it, he touched its head. And the blue in its eyes faded. It fled. And the cult's line broke. Zira loosed one final arrow, shattering the cult leader's staff. Oren fired the beacon. Allied tribes and off-world allies had been waiting. The sky lit up, reinforcements arrived, the broken star fell back, scattered like dust in the wind, and when the sun rose again, Kael stood atop the hill, wounded but proud, roaring not in anger, but in victory. The sky above the jungle turned the color of steel. Storms rumbled in the distance, not of weather, but of memory, of change. The cult had been pushed back, but the war was not over, not yet, and the tribe knew it. In the sacred courtyard beneath the cliffs, 7 fires were lit in a circle, blue flames that crackled without smoke. Warriors stood silent around them, faces painted with ash and symbols older than language. At the center stood a flat stone platform, carved with runes. It hadn't been used in generations. It was a place of vow, of blood and bond. Orin stood shirtless in the center, sweat dripping down his back, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. Across from him, Princess Zira approached slowly. She was no longer dressed in armor, but in ceremonial robes threaded with gold and dark green. Her eyes held no anger, only a question. A curved ceremonial blade rested in her hand. "You understand what this is?" she asked, her voice low. "I do," Orin replied. "This is not about battle, this is about belonging. In our traditions, no one may command a sacred beast unless blood binds them to the royal line. The bond must be sealed, by pain, by choice." Orin nodded. "And if I refuse?" "The bond breaks," Zira said. "Kael will be taken, not out of cruelty, but by law." Orin looked toward Kael, who stood just outside the circle. His scales were scratched from battle. His eyes watched silently, glowing gold beneath the firelight. He didn't growl, he didn't move. He waited. Orin stepped forward, then let it begin. Zira raised the blade and cut across her palm. Blood dripped into the carved bowl between them. Orin did the same. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from gravity. Their blood mingled, blue and red, past and present. Smoke rose from the bowl. First blue, then red, then gold. The elders began to chant, voices low and deep, speaking words only the jungle remembered. Kael stepped forward on his own. He placed one claw in the bowl. The moment his touch met the blood, the runes on the stone lit up in a ring of golden fire. The crowd gasped. The oldest elder stepped forward, voice shaking. "By bond of beast, by blood of royal line, by choice of heart." He looked at Kael, protector of breath, guardian of hope, child of 2 worlds. Kael lifted his head and roared, not in violence, but in harmony. The trial was over. A new tribe had been born. Later that night, Orin sat beside a quiet spring with Zira. Kael lay nearby, his eyes half-lidded, his massive frame curled like a watchful statue. "You didn't have to do it," Zira said. "I know," Orin replied. "But I wanted to." She looked at him, brow raised. "Why?" He smiled. "Because I'm tired of being just a guest in this world. I don't want to raise a protector. I want to protect a home." Zira said nothing, but when she looked at him again, there was something different in her eyes. Not suspicion, not tradition, but respect. High above, on the far cliffs, a new egg sat beneath the twin moons. Not locked away, not hidden, just waiting. Waiting for a world where bonds were chosen, not chained. The sun never rose that day. Thick clouds blanketed the skies above the jungle, turning morning into shadow. From the northern cliffs, the enemy came, 1,000 strong, cloaked in bone armor and broken star banners. The cult of the shattered creed had returned, not to test, not to challenge, but to destroy. Their leader stood tall among them, the silver-haired woman, eyes hollow, heart colder than death. She raised her twisted staff and pointed toward the tribe. "Burn the impure bond," she screamed. "Destroy the future." At the gates of the Narav village stood 3, a human, a princess, a beast once feared by the stars. Orin fastened the final plates of Kael's armor. His hands moved fast but steady. Beside him, Zira painted war sigils on her arms. Not of old Narav, but a fusion of human stars and jungle roots, new marks, new purpose. Kael knelt silently, accepting every strap, every word, every hope. No chain, no leash, only choice. Zira pressed her hand against Kael's head and whispered the oldest blessing. Protector of breath, guardian of hope, child of two worlds, Kael opened his eyes and roared. The sound rippled across the valley. Stones trembled, trees bent, even the enemy paused. Then the battle began. Cultists surged from the tree line. Monsters followed, twisted creatures hatched from corrupted eggs. Beasts with no loyalty, no soul. Kael charged first, not with blind rage, but with deadly clarity. His claws struck not to kill, but to stop. His tail knocked enemies away from children. His back shielded the wounded. He fought like memory made flesh. Zira led warriors in waves. Her arrows lit the sky with light. Orin moved through the chaos with human tech, sonic traps, flash grenades, nets that pulsed with energy. But it was not enough. The cult's numbers were endless, and then it came. From the smoke walked Kael's shadow, the same creature from the first battle, eyes now glowing a sickly blue, scars across its side. It had returned, and this time it was not alone. 5 others like it emerged, clones, failures, ghosts of what Kael could have been. They circled him, but Kael did not roar. He stepped into their ring and bowed. A challenge, a message. One by one, they attacked, and one by one, Kael pushed them back. Not with raw power, but with memory, with control, with restraint. He fought smarter than before, used the terrain, the fire, the water, the wind. He fought like one who had chosen to live. Then he faced the original shadow again. Kael could have ended it, but instead he touched foreheads with the creature. And for a brief moment, the blue in its eyes faded. It fled, not from fear, but from recognition. And the cult broke. Their leader shrieked and raised her staff. Zira loosed a final arrow. It shattered the weapon in her hands. The wind shifted. The clouds broke. Sunlight spilled across the battlefield like forgiveness. Later in the clearing where they had once judged Kael, the tribe gathered once more. The elders stepped forward, laying their crowns at Kael's feet. One spoke. Today we do not praise a warrior, we honor a protector. Today we follow those who build bonds, not cages. He turned to Orin, to Zira, to Kael, and said, today a predator became a symbol of peace. Today a new tribe begins. That night, under stars now clear, Kael rested, between Orin and Zira. No orders passed between them, only breath, only presence. At the edge of the village, a new egg lay in the open, not hidden, not feared, just waiting, waiting for a world where love is not taken, but chosen.